Welcome to Classical Conversations. I'm Haley Taylor. Joining us today, we have Niv Ashkenazi, a virtuoso violinist who is well known throughout the area as he's traveled throughout the States and throughout Europe and the Middle East, accomplished soloist and chamber musician. Niv, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So we're going to talk today about your newest album, Violins of Hope, which is an artistic project, but also an educational one, as every piece of music on this album is performed on instruments that were owned by Jewish musicians before and during the Holocaust. So first and foremost, tell me how this project came to you, or did you seek it out yourself?
Yeah, so I began working with Violins of Hope in 2017. Violins of Hope, they have a collection of instruments that survived the Holocaust and have been restored by Amnon and Avshalom Weinstein. And I began working with them when they were in Sarasota for some events. Basically, they travel around the world with these instruments, doing concerts, educational events, and exhibitions with these instruments. So I was invited to play for them over there. And I had known Amnon from before, but I got a chance to reconnect with him, and it was my chance to meet his son, Avshi. And during the time that we were working together there, I had asked whether we could borrow an instrument for a future event that I was doing that was also Holocaust related, but wasn't Violins of Hope. And they said yes. So I ended up going to Israel. I was visiting family anyways over Passover, and I ended up going to their shop in Tel Aviv and getting to try about 10 instruments out of the collection. And this is the instrument that I chose. And so I've had it for the past few years. And I knew that I wanted to leave a lasting voice, a record of this instrument, because part of Violins of Hope is in restoring these instruments, it's restoring the voice of an instrument that was silenced, and maybe the person that was silenced as well. So this was a chance to make sure that this instrument would never be silenced.
And you're one of the few, if the only violinists to really hold one of these instruments as a long-term loan, kind of in your own possession. Talk about the violin in specific that you chose, and tell the story maybe of that particular instrument.
Yeah, so this instrument, it's a beautiful instrument that was made probably in the early 1900s, probably in Yugoslavia. What they know is that the person who owned it survived and made it to the US, because that's where it was donated from. But most everything else they can piece together from being expert luthiers. They can look at these instruments and sort of see the history there, and they can also put together what they have read in history books. So what they know is that it is a very fine instrument, so it would have gone either to a professional violinist or to a wealthy family. And it has a beautiful Star of David on the back made out of abalone shell. And this was fairly typical for the time, because a lot of the time the person with the most stars of David on their instrument was chosen by the rabbi to play the wedding. So it was also a bit of a marketing tool for the musicians. But they had other symbols as well. It's just the Star of David was most prevalent. And so with this one, what they saw on this instrument was something quite special that they had read about, but they didn't know whether it was true or not. In Orthodox Jewish tradition, you aren't allowed to have representative artwork on the wall. And so what people would do instead was hang these violins with the back facing out so that you could see the Star of David. And what would happen is the light would come through the window and it would hit the back of the violin. It would bleach it. So basically the back of this violin is lighter than the front. And this is one of the first instruments that they saw this on. And that's how they knew that this was something that actually happened and that people actually did.
For you, I can imagine playing on this instrument must be quite the experience. I think performing in general is quite the experience. You have to think of the technical side of the performance, the emotional side of interpreting a piece of music. But then to be holding this instrument that has such a story, for you, are these performances different? Does your approach change because you are holding this piece of history in your hand?
Yes, definitely. With this instrument as well as the others in the collection that I've played on, you get a different connection with the instrument and with the previous owner that you don't usually get from other instruments, because we usually don't know as much as we do even in this situation. So it's always a very special experience. It can be a very emotional experience. And for me, my approach is for each of these instruments, they're each so unique and so different. And so what I try to do is put myself out of the way and just let the voice of the instrument come through.
And then making an album, you mentioned that you worked with Amnon Weinstein and his son on Violins of Hope, but then actually deciding to get into the studio and record and to kind of create a story in that way. Talk about how that specific idea came about and then creating it, finding the pieces of music, the composers that you wanted to work with.
Yeah, so it began... I had been wanting to do this for a little while, and my wife, Leah Cohn, who's the producer of this album, funnily enough, was thinking along the same lines. We both felt that this instrument really deserved a chance to be heard and a record kept of it. And so when I became artist in residence at the Soraya here in Northridge, we had been talking with them just in general and mentioned that we wanted to make an album. And they were very generous in inviting us to record in their beautiful concert hall. And this concert hall was made by the same acoustician that did Disney Hall out here in LA, which is the big venue for the LA Philharmonic. So it was an amazing 3 days of recording. And in terms of picking the repertoire, Leah and I really picked it together. What we wanted was to start off by highlighting composers that had been affected by the Holocaust in one way or another. So, for example, we have Robert Dauber, who died at the age of 23 in one of the camps, and the piece that's on the album, The Serenade, is his only surviving work that he wrote while he was in Terezin. And you can actually hear influences of his father, who was a famous jazz violinist and band leader, in it. You can hear that jazzy feel to it a little bit. And we have Simon Lax, who was the concertmaster of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Men's Orchestra. And he was a composer that wrote before and after, which was not very typical. A lot of musicians quit playing or writing after the Holocaust was over. And then we have others like Julius Chayes and Paul Ben Chaim, who managed to escape before in the 1930s and escape to Israel. And then the rest of the music, we wanted to have it be iconic Jewish music. So we have the theme from Schindler's List, and we have Bloch Nigun, and Bloch was a key player in creating the Jewish sound that we hear today and what we think of as a Jewish sound. And finally, we wanted to represent the future of classical music. And for that, we approached Sharon Farber because of her previous work, as well as just loving what she had done. And she created for us a special piece that she had taken actually from her cello concerto, with narration, and she turned it into a violin and four-hand piano piece with narration. And it tells the story of Kurt Loewens, who was a survivor and hero of the Dutch resistance. He was the translator that was there when they were arresting some of the top officials in the Nazi party at the very end. And he, this is in his words, and it's a very, very special piece. And so we wanted to have that be the future of Jewish music.
Like shadows, they emerge from the foggy dawn. And I wonder, how will we carry on?
And speaking about the future, I mean, I think some of the fun in going to the studio is then also kind of imagining what a tour would look like and experiencing the music live with an audience. I'm sure you probably were not planning for a pandemic during the time of creating this album and then planning to experience this album with an audience. How did you go about that change, maneuvering that change?
Absolutely. And yes, we did not expect this pandemic, and definitely caught us by surprise. This album was actually supposed to support 2-month-long events for Violins of Hope in LA, which ended up being postponed to January and February of next year. But we already had the album out, so we decided to go along with it, and we're planning to still tour with it once this is all over. But it's a very different experience playing this music live versus in the studio, and I'm so excited to be able to reconnect with the pianist, Matthew Graybil, who lives in New York, and I'm out here in California. So I'm excited for us to be able to meet again and play this music and maybe some other music for the tour.
Right. I mean, it's the perfect title for this time, Violins of Hope. It's interesting, the history of that title in connection with the history of these instruments, but also in the kind of the day and age that we are in today. And in that day and age, I think people are being a little extra reflective and thinking about maybe their lives in different ways. For you doing this project and then kind of, I'm sure, having to put a pause on things during this time, as many musicians are having to put a pause during this time of quarantine. What did this project teach you, or did you learn something new about yourself from making this album, Violins of Hope?
Yeah, I mean, the whole project was a wonderful learning experience and a chance to really connect with a bunch of people on best practices for it and learning a lot of the history, which was really quite incredible to get to dig in deeper. And, talking about the hope that you were talking about and how it reflects on this period, I've talked multiple times with Amnon, and he's brought it up several times that this is the first time since the Holocaust that we've had a truly global crisis, and that now more than ever he is hoping that people find the hope within these instruments and hearing them and the music.
Well, Niv Ashkenazi, thank you so much for joining me today, and such a fascinating, emotional, and beautiful project that I'm so excited to share with our listeners, Violins of Hope. I hope that you will stay healthy and happy during this time, and that you will be able to get back on the road and perform this to an audience as it really should be experienced.
Thank you so much, Haley, and thank you so much for sharing this recording. It really means a lot to me.